Billionaire was buying a cake with his fiancée for engagement. His ex appeared with twins. A real estate mogul is selecting his engagement cake at Manhattan's most exclusive patisserie when his past literally walks through the door in the form of an ex-girlfriend and two 4-year-old twins who share his unmistakable steel-gray eyes and defiant chin. The pink cake on the counter, meant to symbolize his carefully planned future, suddenly becomes a barrier between the life Richard Branson has constructed and the life he destroyed 5 years ago. He approaches his engagement to Eleanor Brooks the way he approaches a corporate acquisition, analyzing ROI, securing strategic advantages, managing optics for the New York Times Society pages. His relationship with Eleanor is presented as hollow and transactional. She brings blue blood credibility to his self-made fortune, he brings her family access to new money power. This carefully controlled world is contrasted with the chaotic, vibrant intrusion of Margaret Whitfield and the twins, Olivia and Ethan. Where Eleanor represents cool precision, her designer dress, her critique of cake flavors as if reviewing quarterly earnings, Margaret's presence in a simple red dress with two paint-stained children explodes into the sterile space like color splashed on a gray canvas. The twins' innocent curiosity, "Mommy, that man has the same eyes as me," and Richard's visible shock, captured in his frozen posture, the sudden pallor beneath his tan, the way his hand unconsciously reaches for the counter as if the ground has shifted, immediately establishes the central conflict, Richard's meticulously constructed empire of emotional control versus the suppressed reality of the family he abandoned. Richard has spent 5 years confusing achievement with fulfillment, believing that emotions could be managed like risk portfolios and that success could insulate him from the consequences of his choices. The appearance of his children shatters this delusion, and the pink engagement cake, symbol of his planned future, now looks absurd next to the living proof of his past. Richard's penthouse felt different that night. The floor-to-ceiling windows that usually made him feel like a king surveying his domain now seemed like walls of a glass prison. He stood at the bar, pouring his third scotch, but the burn in his throat couldn't erase the image of those steel-gray eyes staring back at him from two small faces. Eleanor emerged from the bedroom, her silk robe a whisper of expensive fabric. "Are we going to discuss the scene at the patisserie, or shall we pretend it didn't happen?" "I didn't know," Richard said, but the words felt hollow even to him. Eleanor's laugh was sharp as crystal. "Richard, please. You think I don't research my investments? I knew about Margaret Whitfield the day you proposed. Art therapist, lives in Red Hook, single mother of twins born February 2021. She moved closer, her perfume cloying. What I didn't know is whether you'd be stupid enough to acknowledge them." The calculation in her eyes, the same calculation he'd admired as strategic thinking, now made him nauseous. "The engagement party is in 2 weeks," Eleanor continued. "My father has already committed significant political capital to this union. You will handle this situation. Pay her off, sign whatever documents ensure they stay invisible, and we proceed as planned." After she retreated to the bedroom, Richard found himself scrolling through his phone's voicemail archive, something he never did. The deleted folder held messages from years ago, digital ghosts he'd been too busy to hear. Then he found it, a message from 5 years ago, timestamp 11:47 p.m., 3 days before he'd ended things with Margaret via text because a merger meeting ran late. He pressed play. Margaret's voice trembled through the speaker. "Richard, I need to tell you something important. Please call me back. I really need you to call me back." The message was 17 seconds long. He'd never listened to it. He'd been on a plane to Hong Kong, closing a deal worth $400 million. The phone slipped from his hand, and Richard Branson, who never broke, shattered. Red Hook, Brooklyn felt like another planet. Richard's driver looked uncomfortable navigating the industrial streets, so far from the polished avenues of Manhattan. The art studio occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse, its windows painted with childlike rainbows and stars. Through the glass, Richard watched Margaret guide a dozen children through a painting exercise. She wore paint-stained jeans and a faded NYU t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked exactly as she had 5 years ago, and completely different. There was a gravity to her now, a strength that hadn't been there before. When the class ended and the last parent collected their child, Margaret finally acknowledged him. The door locks in 15 minutes. Say what you came to say. I didn't know you were pregnant. Liar. The word cut clean. I left you 17 voicemails. I came to your office building 4 times. Your assistant said you were unavailable. Margaret began cleaning paintbrushes with sharp, angry movements. I waited in our apartment for 3 days. Then I saw you in the Times Society pages at the Whitney Gala with Eleanor Brooks, and I understood. Margaret. Do you know what it's like to carry twins alone? To go to ultrasounds and hear 2 heartbeats and have no one to share it with? To give birth while watching other women's partners hold their hands? Her voice cracked. I didn't want your money, Richard. I wanted you to want them. I would have. No. Margaret dropped the brushes. You wouldn't have. You were already gone. You'd been disappearing for months, every conversation about strategic positioning, every dinner interrupted by calls from Thomas Ashford, every weekend cancelled for site visits. The merger was your real relationship. I was just the thing you came home to when you needed to feel human. Richard had faced hostile boardrooms, aggressive investors, cutthroat competitors. None of it compared to the quiet devastation in Margaret's eyes. They were never a mistake, Richard, she said softly. You were. The Central Park Zoo on a Sunday morning felt surreal, children's laughter echoing off stone pathways, the smell of popcorn and animal feed, tourists with cameras. Richard arrived 20 minutes early, wearing jeans and a polo shirt that his stylist had selected as approachably casual. He felt like a fraud. Margaret arrived precisely on time, holding hands with Olivia and Ethan. The twins wore matching backpacks shaped like animals, Olivia's a tiger, Ethan's an elephant. They stopped at a respectful distance, and Richard noticed how Margaret positioned herself slightly in front of them, protective. Olivia studied him with unnerving intensity. Are you our daddy? The question hit like a physical blow. Richard, who had once told a room of investors they were leaving money on the table, without a tremor in his voice, found himself speechless. Mommy cries sometimes, Olivia continued, matter of fact. She says our daddy is busy. Livy, Margaret said gently. But Ethan stepped forward, clutching a worn stuffed elephant. His voice was softer than his sister's, tentative. You can hold Mr. Trunk if you're sad. He makes me feel better when I'm scared. The boy extended the toy with both hands, and Richard took it because refusing would have broken something fundamental. The elephant smelled like laundry detergent and childhood, and Richard's vision blurred. They walked to the sea lion exhibit in awkward silence. Olivia peppered him with questions. Do you live in a big house? Do you have a dog? Why didn't you come before? Each one a small blade. Ethan stayed close to Margaret, occasionally glancing at Richard as if trying to solve a puzzle. At the petting zoo, Olivia demanded Richard help her feed the goats. She grabbed his hand without hesitation, her small fingers sticky with cotton candy, and pulled him forward. Richard, who negotiated billion-dollar deals, who commanded rooms with a glance, who had built an empire on calculated risk, found himself terrified of disappointing a 4-year-old girl with his eyes. Senator Brooks's Connecticut estate sprawled across 40 acres of manicured perfection, the kind of old-money fortress that made even Richard's penthouse seem nouveau riche. The senator received him in a mahogany-paneled study that reeked of privilege and power. Eleanor sat in a leather chair by the window, perfectly composed in Chanel. She hadn't spoken to Richard since his first visit with the twins, communicating only through her assistant about postponing certain wedding arrangements pending resolution of complications. Richard. The senator didn't offer his hand. I'll be direct. Eleanor's inheritance from her late mother's family is substantial, approximately $300 million. However, it comes with conditions. Any scandal, any public embarrassment, triggers a morality clause that diverts the funds to charity. Richard remained standing. With respect, Senator, this isn't about money. Everything is about money, son. Don't insult my intelligence. The senator slid a document across the desk. Prenuptial agreement, revised. Page 7, Clause 14, no financial responsibility or legal recognition for children conceived outside this marriage. You sign this, the engagement proceeds. The unfortunate situation in Red Hook remains private. Everyone wins. Except my children. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice crisp. They're not your children, Richard. They're a liability. You spent exactly 3 hours with them. Are you really going to throw away our future for a woman who trapped you and 2 children you don't know? Richard looked at her, truly looked, and saw what he'd been too ambitious to notice before. Eleanor Brooks didn't love him. She loved his trajectory, his usefulness, his ability to make her parents' political donors interested in supporting her father's gubernatorial campaign. He was a chess piece, and she'd been calculating 3 moves ahead since the day they met. I've known about the twins for 6 months, Eleanor continued. I had them investigated. Margaret Whitfield's studio barely breaks even. She drives a 12-year-old Honda. You think she orchestrated this encounter by accident? She's playing you. Actually, Richard said quietly, I think I've been playing myself. He left the document and signed on the senator's desk. The Plaza Ballroom glittered with Manhattan's elite, 300 guests in evening wear, ice sculptures of swans, champagne fountains, and a jazz quartet playing Cole Porter. Eleanor's engagement party had been planned for 8 months, every detail curated to signal arrival into New York's upper echelons. Richard stood at the microphone, Eleanor beside him in an ivory gown that cost more than most people earned in a year. The room quieted, expectant. He was supposed to deliver a toast, a charming story about how they met, a promise of their brilliant future. Instead, he said, I need to tell you the truth. Eleanor's hand tightened on her champagne flute. Her father, seated at the head table, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. 5 years ago, I was in a relationship with a woman named Margaret Whitfield. She got pregnant. And Richard's voice caught. I abandoned her. I was too consumed with a merger to return her calls. Too focused on building my empire to build a family. She tried to tell me about our children, twins, Olivia and Ethan, and I disappeared. The room erupted in whispers. A photographer's flash went off. Eleanor's face had gone pale, then red. I met them last week in a bakery, and I've spent the past 5 days getting to know the most remarkable children I've ever encountered. And I realized something. I've been a coward. I chose business over love. Success over family. And I'm done pretending that was the right choice. Richard, stop, Eleanor hissed. This engagement was a mistake. Not because Eleanor isn't accomplished or brilliant, she is. But because I was marrying for the wrong reasons. Strategy instead of love. Optics instead of truth. He turned to her. I'm sorry, Eleanor. You deserve someone who sees you as more than a strategic alliance. Eleanor's champagne glass arced through the air, the contents splashing across Richard's face and tuxedo. You self-destructive idiot, she whispered. Then louder, for the room, he's having a breakdown. Someone call security. Senator Brooks stood, his voice booming. You just buried yourself, Branson. I will personally ensure you never. But Richard was already walking toward the exit, leaving behind the glittering cage he'd built, feeling lighter with every step. Richard's first solo visit to Margaret's apartment was a disaster. He arrived with $3,000 worth of toys from FAO Schwartz, a playhouse, a telescope, a custom dollhouse that required assembly. Olivia took one look at the pile and said, "Why did you buy so much stuff?" Margaret, stirring pasta sauce in her tiny kitchen, didn't even turn around. They don't need things, Richard. They need time. I thought. You thought you could buy your way into their hearts. She handed him a wooden spoon. Stir this. Don't let it stick. The apartment was cramped, a two-bedroom walk-up with mismatched furniture and children's artwork taped to every wall. But it felt alive in a way Richard's penthouse never had. Ethan showed him a painting of a family, 3 figures and a dog. "That's Mommy, me, Livy, and Winston. He's our pretend dog because we can't have real ones here." Dinner was chaotic. Olivia spilled juice, Ethan didn't like green beans, and Margaret mediated with the patience of a UN negotiator. Richard's phone buzzed 17 times, emails from Thomas, messages from reporters, a text from Eleanor's lawyer. He silenced it. After dinner, Margaret demonstrated the bedtime routine. Stories first. Ethan likes The Runaway Bunny, Olivia prefers Where the Wild Things Are. Read it exactly the same way every time. They notice if you skip words. Richard read The Runaway Bunny to Ethan, stumbling over the rhythms. The boy corrected him gently, "Mommy does the voices different." So Richard tried again, giving the mother bunny a soft voice, the baby bunny a curious one. Ethan leaned against him, warm and trusting, and Richard's chest ached. The next Sunday, they went to the park. Richard learned that Olivia could climb any jungle gym and had no fear, while Ethan preferred collecting interesting rocks. Wednesday dinner, he helped make tacos, badly. His phone stayed in his pocket. By the 4th visit, Olivia let him braid her hair, and though it looked terrible, she wore it to preschool anyway. For the first time in 20 years, Richard felt genuinely useful. The call came at 2:17 p.m. during a conference call about the Hudson Yards deal. Margaret's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Richard, there's been an accident. Olivia fell at the playground. We're at Mount Sinai. She needs surgery." Richard left mid-sentence, leaving Thomas and 3 investors staring at a blank screen. His driver navigated traffic with aggressive precision, but every red light felt eternal. He arrived at the pediatric emergency department disheveled, his tie askew, and found Margaret in a plastic chair outside surgery, her hands shaking. "Compound fracture of the radius," she said without preamble. She was showing off on the monkey bars, trying to impress Ethan. "Wouldn't let the paramedics touch her until I got there." Margaret's voice broke. "She kept asking for you. Is Daddy coming? Did someone tell Daddy?" Richard sat beside her, taking her trembling hands in his. "I'm here." The next 3 hours stretched like years. Margaret paced, sat, paced again. She blamed herself, should have been watching more closely, should have anticipated Olivia's recklessness, should have chosen a different playground. Richard listened, offered water she didn't drink, and realized he'd never seen her vulnerable before. Margaret, who had carried twins alone, who had built a business while raising children, who had survived his abandonment with grace, she was terrified. "I can't do this alone anymore," she whispered. "I've been pretending I can, but I'm so tired, Richard. And the worst part? I keep waiting for you to disappear again. To decide this is too hard, too messy, too real." Richard pulled her close, and she finally let herself cry against his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not again. Never again." When Olivia emerged from surgery, groggy from anesthesia, she saw them together and smiled. "You came, Daddy." Her small hand reached for his. "Will you stay?" Richard looked at Margaret, who nodded permission. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll stay." Thomas Ashford called the emergency board meeting for Friday at 8 a.m., strategic timing designed to catch Richard off balance. But Richard arrived early, suit pressed, mind clear. The conference room held 12 board members, all of whom avoided eye contact except Thomas, who met his gaze with calculated sympathy. "Richard, we're concerned," Thomas began, his tone practiced. "The Hudson Yards deal represents $3.5 billion in value creation. But our investors are nervous. Your personal situation has become problematic." Problematic. Richard tasted the corporate euphemism. "You mean my children? The optics are challenging." This from Gerald Chen, who'd once called Richard a visionary leader. Senator Brooks has been speaking to people. The broken engagement, the abandoned children story, it's messy. Investors want stability. Thomas pushed a document across the table. We've drafted a statement. It positions Margaret Whitfield as an opportunistic claimant seeking financial settlement. You express sympathy but maintain she's not credible. We leak it to the Times, control the narrative, and the Hudson Yards deal closes in 3 weeks. Richard read the statement. It called Margaret a supposed former romantic partner, and implied the twins might not be his. It painted him as a victim of gold-digging deceit. Or? Richard asked quietly. Or the board initiates a vote of no confidence. You're removed as CEO, and we proceed with Hudson Yards under new leadership. You keep your shares but lose operational control. Thomas leaned forward. Richard, be rational. You've known these children for what, 3 weeks? You're throwing away 20 years of building this company for a woman who never even filed for child support and 2 kids you barely know. That's not noble. That's insane. Richard asked for 48 hours. He didn't spend them strategizing with lawyers or negotiating terms. Instead, he taught Ethan to ride a bike in Prospect Park, running alongside until the boy found his balance and pedaled away, laughing. He watched Olivia paint a sunset, her cast already covered in signatures and doodles. He sat with Margaret on her apartment steps and talked about what kind of world they wanted their children to inherit. Sunday night, Richard called Thomas. I have my answer. The boardroom felt different Monday morning, smaller, less imposing. Richard stood at the head of the table where he'd sat for 15 years, where he'd built an empire one calculated risk at a time. I'm resigning as CEO, effective immediately. I'll sell my shares back to the company at current market value and walk away from the Hudson Yards deal. Silence. Then Gerald Chen, you're joking. I've never been more serious. Richard looked at Thomas, whose face cycled through shock to calculation to something like pity. I spent 20 years building this company. I sacrificed relationships, health, any semblance of personal life. I told myself it mattered, that legacy was measured in buildings and valuations. It does matter, Thomas snapped. You're throwing away everything we built. No. You'll build Hudson Yards just fine without me. It'll be profitable, impressive, forgettable. Just another glass tower in a city full of them. Richard smiled. But my children won't be 4 years old forever. They won't ask me to read them stories forever. They won't offer me their stuffed elephants when I'm sad forever. Those moments, they're not renewable resources. Thomas stood. This is emotional thinking. You're experiencing some kind of midlife crisis. You're making a decision you'll regret when you're rational again. Maybe. But I've made a lot of decisions I thought were rational, and I regret all of them. Richard gathered his briefcase. I'm choosing to be present over being powerful. To be a father instead of a titan. And for the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm making the right choice. 6 months later, Richard woke at 5 a.m. in a brownstone 2 blocks from Margaret's apartment. The kitchen was smaller than his penthouse closet had been, but sunlight came through the east window just right. He made pancakes, his specialty now, heart-shaped for Olivia, elephant-shaped for Ethan, though they never looked quite right. The twins arrived at 6:30, thundering up the stairs with their backpacks. Richard had them 3 nights a week and every other weekend. He'd launched a non-profit development firm focused on affordable housing, with Margaret as director of community arts programs. Ethan poured syrup on his pancake, then looked up. Daddy, are you rich? Richard caught Margaret's smile from across the table. Not anymore, buddy. But you have us, Olivia declared. That's pretty good. Better than good, Richard said, reaching for his daughter's hand. That's the wealthiest I've ever been.